What's up? This is Dr. Taylor Krick at the Washington Wellness Center, and today I'm going to talk about one of the most important concepts, if not the most important concept in autoimmunity, and that is immune system tolerance. So tolerance is the key to dampening autoimmunity. Tolerance basically is autoimmunity, and if you can understand this concept of tolerance, you can understand how to support any and all autoimmune processes, because autoimmunity is by definition a loss of tolerance. So what is tolerance? Well, in a nutshell, tolerance is your immune system recognizing good guys from bad guys. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if I have an infection, my immune system, I want it to attack that infection, right? We want to have a strong immune system. We want to boost our immune system. If I have an influenza virus, I want my immune system to attack that. If I have a rhinovirus, if I have a bacterial infection like strep or staph, I want my immune system to mount an attack against that. That is what keeps us alive. That's what keeps us from dying from infection. We want an immune system that attacks bad guys. But when the immune system loses tolerance, it begins to attack good guys. So a good guy might be a food particle. That's not necessarily a bad guy. It's not a pathogen. It's not anything that's trying to damage us or kill us, but the immune system has marked it as bad, and now it's creating this immune response, which is an inflammatory response, and it can create problems and inflammation. The other one is self-tissue. You do not want your immune system attacking your body's self-tissue. That is autoimmune disease. So loss of tolerance is the cornerstone concept of autoimmune disease. If you can understand this concept of tolerance, you understand autoimmune disease. So we're going to talk about loss of oral tolerance. We're going to talk about loss of chemical tolerance, and then we're going to talk about loss of self-tolerance. There are other concepts in this, like peripheral tolerance and central tolerance, and it's pretty complex immunology. But if you understand this general concept that your body has lost tolerance and it's beginning to attack your brain, your thyroid, your joints, your gut, boosting the immune system in that case is going to boost that attack against your own tissue, cause further tissue damage and destruction, and take you further down the road of autoimmune disease and symptoms. So we want to dampen tolerance, but we don't want to just shut down the immune system. We don't want to suppress the immune system through something like a corticosteroid or a prednisone or a Medrol or something. We don't want to just dampen the immune system, because that leaves us susceptible to infection. So what we want to do is we don't want to boost the immune system. We don't want to dampen the immune system. We want to support tolerance. So loss of tolerance, like we said, is autoimmune disease. The immune system, auto meaning self, and immune, autoimmune, the immune system is attacking self tissue. And like we said, if it's attacking your thyroid, it's diagnosed as Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. If it's attacking your brain, then it's going to be diagnosed as multiple sclerosis. It's going to be diagnosed as Parkinson's. It might present as dementia. It might be diagnosed as Alzheimer's. These things have an autoimmune component to them, and the immune system is attacking the brain tissue, and eventually it causes permanent destruction of neurons and permanent destruction of brain tissue, and that is the autoimmune process. If it's attacking your joints, it could be rheumatoid arthritis, it could be lupus, it could be different things causing a lot of joint pain, causing tissue destruction, or attacking the connective tissues as well. If it's attacking the digestive system, it could be celiac disease, it could be ulcerative colitis, it could be Crohn's disease. But whatever tissue, there's over 80 to 100 plus named autoimmune conditions now. And what science is really discovering is that basically every disease that we know of has an autoimmune component because it's inflammatory and the immune system triggers inflammation. I was actually talking with somebody the other day about who has some crazy swelling and inflammation. And I said, boy, something about the immune system. He said, you think this is an immune response? Any inflammation in general, is an immune response. It's your immune system responding and bringing things there that trigger inflammation. So we need to understand this concept here. So the why of why this has happened, why is your immune system attacking the thyroid, why is it attacking the brain, why is it attacking the joints? The immune system has lost the ability to distinguish self from non-self. The immune system has lost tolerance. So you could think of this like a security guard at a concert. He's letting good guys in, but he's keeping bad guys out. Well, if you blindfold him, he's not going to be able to tell good from bad. Or maybe you think of it like a soldier shooting bad guys, not shooting the good guys. You blindfold him, and all of a sudden he's going haywire, crazy, and he or she is shooting good guys and bad guys, and they've lost the ability to distinguish good from bad. They've lost tolerance. So first thing that often happens, the most common cause of autoimmunity is a loss of oral tolerance. And what that means is that you have food sensitivities through a leaky gut and through different things in the gut, but your body begins to flag these foods as bad guys and it mounts an attack on them. And that can often be the gateway to autoimmune disease. I'll show a graphic here in a second that just shows how that happens, but just know that that can absolutely be the gateway. And here's a review article paper here, oral tolerance and its relationship to food immunoreactivity. So we do food sensitivity testing. A lot of people have had food sensitivity testing, and what that's telling us is sometimes, has your body lost tolerance to these foods? Or sometimes we'll see a food panel come back and it'll have 30 or 40 positives on it, and that is a sign that your body's just lost tolerance. It's attacking everything that you've been eating. And a lot of times when we have a test like that, the person will say, oh, that's everything I've been eating. Like, what am I supposed to do? I've been eating avocados. I've been eating bananas. I've been eating blueberries. I've been eating broccoli. I've been eating these things. Why are they showing up red on my food sensitivity test? Have I been eating all the wrong things? And no, your immune system has just lost tolerance. We need to pull out those foods that are major triggers, or pull out some of the biggest ones, but the underlying goal is to support tolerance. So with oral tolerance, there's a lot of things that go into that, but we want your body to be in this state of what's called homeostasis. Homeostasis meaning balance. So there are a lot of things that feed into oral tolerance. So this is just a really great graphic from the paper that I cited in the last slide. So there are things that impact this, like your genes, like your age. Were you breastfed as a baby? Your nutrition overall. Do you eat high quality organic food, or do you live on McDonald's and Flamin' Hot Cheetos and Dr. Pepper? Your vitamin D status. We're going to talk about that. Your other dietary factors and the antigens that you're exposed to, the chemicals that you're exposed to, the food antigens you're exposed to, the environmental factors, any drugs or medications that you've taken have an impact on this tolerance. Then what tolerance, these things, you see these arrows are going both ways. Tolerance impacts this, and this impacts tolerance. So this is allergies. So if you've lost tolerance, you've lost sensitivity to a particular substance like pollen, for example, or peanuts, that is, your body has lost tolerance to that, and it's just created a different type of response than a food sensitivity. It's what's called an IgE antibody response, and that impacts tolerance, and tolerance impacts the development of allergies, the development of asthma, some of these atopic diseases. Epithelial permeability. What that means is leaky gut. So leaky gut causes loss of tolerance, and loss of tolerance causes more leaky gut through the inflammation that's driven through it. The microbiota, the indigenous microbiota, what that means is the bugs and the bacteria in your gut that make up your microbiome. We have 10 times more bacteria on our body than we have cells in our body. We have 100 times more viruses in our body than we have cells in our body. So we have all these other organisms living in and on us that are really, really important for determining tolerance. So probiotics we're going to talk about as one of the things that can help tolerance. Then the exogenous microbes, so things like LPS, I'm not going to explain that, but that's an inflammatory particle of bacterial cell membranes, and it just causes a lot of problems. So how does this happen? So this is from the journal Autoimmune Diseases, an editorial called Environmental Triggers and Autoimmunity. But you see at the top here, we have these environmental triggers. Our body's exposed to these environmental triggers, whether those be toxins, whether those be food particles, and the things that we looked at in the last slide kind of determine how susceptible you are to this. But then you have a breakdown of oral tolerance. Then you have a change in the microbiome. You have a change in the composition of the good and bad bacteria of your gut. Then you have enhanced gut permeability. Then you have leaky gut. The leaky gut leads to immune reactivity. The immune reactivity leads to autoimmunity. So this is the mechanism for how autoimmunity can be induced and neuroautoimmunity by environmental triggers. You're exposed, your body loses tolerance, marks them as bad. There's a change in your microbiome, maybe from antibiotics, maybe from anything else, lots of different things. Then you have leaky gut, that leads to immune reactivity, and then that leads to an autoimmune disease. That's oral tolerance, okay? And that's really, really important to understand the oral tolerance component. Your body can also lose what's called chemical tolerance. So you could be exposed to a chemical and your body marks it as bad, and it starts to create this response against it. And as it starts to create this inflammatory response against it, it causes a loss of tolerance that can lead to a loss of self-tolerance. So looking at this one, same journal, different title, but same issue, I think, autoimmune diseases. So the chemical exposure, and then through different genetic factors and barrier breakdowns like we looked at 2 slides ago, then you have a parent compound or a metabolite formation from that chemical. Let's say it's mercury, for example. Then it's going to create oxidative stress, and you create what's called neoantigens and haptens and these different things that activate your immune system. So then you're activating your T cells, your macrophages, your B cells. That's creating inflammation and antibodies, that's what we talked about with the loss of tolerance. Your immune system is starting to flag good things as bad, because it's going in attack mode. So you're starting to create these antibodies against these chemicals, and then you start to create antibodies against self-tissue. Then that leads to inflammation and autoimmune reactivities. So foods can do this, environmental compounds can do this, a lot of different things can cause a loss of tolerance over time. So here are some important players in the game of tolerance and some things that you need to be looking out for, whether you have an autoimmune disease or you have kids. You know, for my kids, a goal of mine isn't to never expose them to anything bad. In fact, quite the opposite. We want them exposed to childhood infections. We want them exposed to germs. We want them exposed to bugs, because those help develop tolerance. But the main goal is having them avoid a loss of tolerance down the road. So in some important players, a vaginal birth. This is all very well established in the scientific literature. So the vaginal birth, or having birth by C-section, is associated with a loss of tolerance down the road and autoimmune conditions down the road and immune dysregulation down the road later in life. So the ideal way to have a baby is through the vagina, the way the baby making was kind of designed to happen. But that's the baby's first dosage of good probiotics is actually coming through the vaginal canal. And that day, and even before that, mom's health is really, really important to this. And there's maternal fetal antibodies and different things that, like, way before the day of birth, it's important for developing tolerance. Mom's immune system is important for developing tolerance. But a vaginal birth, was the child breastfed? That has been shown to be very, very important for tolerance. So yeah, that's really important. Then childhood infections, like I mentioned, getting these infections is actually really, really good for the long-term immune health of children. So getting some things like colds, flus, chicken pox, getting some of these childhood infections is actually really, really important. So let's say just after these first three, let's say we have somebody who mom is maybe unhealthy, and then they're born via C-section, and then they're fed formula, and then they don't get these childhood infections, then they are set up for a loss of tolerance. Their risk for autoimmune disease goes up down the road, and this has been pretty well studied and very well documented in the scientific literature that all these things matter. That's not to say that if you've had any of these things that it's for sure going to happen or that it's guaranteed. It's not. It's all these things are multifactorial, but they all increase the risk. The next one is antibiotic and medication history. So let's say once again that same kid, like me as a kid, let's say they have chronic ear infections and you're taking them in, and for me, it was 1986 or something, and when I was 2, and antibiotics were just like what you did. And so I did tons of rounds of antibiotics, and especially earlier in life, that makes a huge difference. It changes the microbiome. We already saw how important the microbiome is to tolerance. Other medications do the same. Oral contraceptives, birth control, well known to disrupt the microbiome. Corticosteroids, anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs like Tylenol, Aleve, ibuprofen, they disrupt the microbiome. I don't know, there's virtually no medications that I know of that don't disrupt the microbiome, some more than others, but your antibiotic and your medication history, very, very relevant to this topic. So let's say you're 40 and you just got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Well, how many people are looking back to when you were 1? We are in our office, but it doesn't really matter about what we need to do today. So you come into our office looking for help, and we need to do certain things today, but that is absolutely important. Everything going back to your childhood, even your adverse childhood events, like traumatic events, have been linked to autoimmune disease in the future. So even just stressful psychological events are linked to this in the future. So your antibiotic and medication history, your microbiome abundance and diversity are very, very important players in tolerance. You want to have an abundance of bugs in your gut, and you want to have a high diversity of bugs in your gut. And both of those things are really, really important for establishing tolerance. And we saw in a couple of those previous slides, we saw how important the microbiome was, and the changes that could happen in the microbiome are kind of in between this exposure and this autoimmune disease. There's that whole phase of the microbiome, and when this loss of tolerance happens, the microbiome is a really important player in that. Then you have your gut immune system. That's your first line of defense. You could also say your nasal immune system, your lung barriers, your barriers that block things from getting in. They are supposed to let good things in and bad things out, like oxygen. You want oxygen to be able to get through your lung barrier. It's pretty important. You want food, you want nutrients to be able to get through your gut barrier, but you don't want the bad things to be able to get through. So that's intestinal permeability or lung permeability or any barrier, blood-brain barrier permeability. But you have an immune system in there that protects these things. So it has things like secretory IgA. That's your immune system's first line of defense. You have these things called antigen-presenting cells like dendritic cells, mast cells that can be overactive when you lose tolerance. So that is not a good thing. You want to have a good, healthy gut immune system and barrier immune system. Then you have this thing called Th1 and Th2 balance. And when your immune system gets tipped one way or the other, it throws your whole immune system off. And we're going to show a slide of this in just a second. And we're not talking about it exactly today. We have a whole nother webinar on autoimmune disease supplements. But you can be tipped towards a Th1 dominance, you can be tipped towards a Th2 dominance, and it's throwing off the balance of your immune system. The Th1 side fights things like viruses and bugs and infections and pathogens. The Th2 side is more of a B cell side and antibody production and more of a humoral side of your immune system. So they're just very, very different. And you don't want to be tipped one way or the other. Th2 is more associated with allergies, asthma, eczema, atopic diseases. Th1 is more traditionally associated with autoimmune diseases, but that's a gross generalization that is oftentimes not completely accurate in a lot of these autoimmune diseases. You want it to be balanced. And then the last thing, probably the most important thing on this slide, are these regulatory T cells. And what the regulatory T cells do is they bring balance to the immune system. We're going to show a few slides on them in a second, but the number one takeaway from this whole video is these regulatory T cells dampen autoimmunity by inducing tolerance. Very, very important. And if you're tipped to the Th1, you're tipped to the Th2, they're going to bring you to balance right in the middle of that teeter-totter. So here's a picture just showing, there's the balance, Th1, Th2. In cancer, it tends to be more of a Th2 tip. In autoimmune disease, tends to be more of a Th1 tip. But like I said, that's a gross generalization. There's all kinds of nuances to this Th1, Th2 T cell polarization story. And immunomodulation, you could raise both Th1 and Th2, or you could lower both Th1 and Th2. So that's the balance, and that's what the regulatory T cells are trying to work on. So when we talk next about supplements that can help tolerance, they are largely looking at things like the microbiome and looking at these regulatory T cells. So here are a few things that can help. Digestive enzymes are one thing. So when your food gets broken down very, very far, it does not cause as much of an immune reaction. So your immune system in your gut sits in what's called the lamina propria, and when your food is broken down into individual amino acids, the immune system in the lamina propria does not respond to individual amino acids. It responds to longer peptides and proteins, which are like a chain of these amino acids. So the further your food is broken down, the less responsive it's going to be. So that includes things like hydrochloric acid in the stomach, different proteases. There's certain enzymes called DPP4 enzymes, brush border enzymes, that break down gluten and casein more. So there are certain products that you could carry with you, and if you're going to a restaurant and you know you have a gluten sensitivity and you don't know if your food is 100% gluten-free, you could take a higher dosage of these DPP4 enzymes to break down that gluten so that it's not going to trigger an inflammatory response. But digestive enzymes, really, really important. Vitamin D, really, really important for tolerance. And I'm not going to talk about it that much because the next slide is actually showing it, but it supports the gut lining, it supports the regulatory T cells, and it supports these dendritic cells, and it supports, a little bit of everything in the tolerance game. And it's also what we call a low-hanging fruit because it is cheap and it is easy, and we'll measure it and it'll be so low. I mean, yesterday I went over a couple and one was 32, which is below 30 is medically insufficient. The other one was 17, and below 20 is medically deficient. And these were labs that she brought me from her endocrinologist. And I said, what did they tell you about this low vitamin D? They said, oh, just take a vitamin D supplement. I said, how much are you taking? What are you doing? I don't know. I just went out and got one. Like, okay, well, we need to get that up. It's easy to retest it. So if we get 17 up to 60, we know that her tolerance is improved. That's an easy one. Vitamin A does a lot of the same things, supports the gut lining, supports the Tregs, just really, really good for tolerance. I'll show a slide about that in a second as well. Glutathione. Glutathione is the most important supplement that we use. If you've watched any of our other webinars, you've probably heard about it because it's great for the aging brain, it's great for autoimmunity, it's great for detox, it's really, really important for all those things. It's our number one most used supplement, and it helps support tolerance. It protects the cells, it supports the Tregs, it does so many things. Short chain fatty acids. This is probably the biggest one on here. And it's the newest science and the newest research. That's why it has some exclamation points by it. It supports the tight junctions of the gut. So eliminating a leaky gut or strengthening a leaky gut. It supports these regulatory T cells in a massive, massive way. It also supports the microbiome. So really, really, really important supplement that's pretty new. And we just did a post recently on Instagram or Facebook or something that said short chain fatty acids are the new probiotics. And that is true. Probiotics are the old probiotics. So you want good probiotics, you want abundance and diversity. So you want a strong probiotic. You also want many strains of probiotic. You want bacterial abundance and diversity in a big, big way. Really important for immune tolerance. You might want leaky gut support, different things like glutamine, aloe vera, marshmallow root, DGL, deglycerized licorice, leaky gut support, anything that helps support that leaky gut. And you might need to support your detox pathways for tolerance, phase 1 and phase 2 of detox. Those things like B vitamins, amino acids, methylation support, all those things could help support tolerance in the immune system. So here's a graphic that shows that this vitamin D gradient. And so over here on the left is high level of vitamin D. And over here on the right is a low level of vitamin D. So over here on the left, we've got this protective mucus layer here. We've got these nice tight gut cells. And we've got tolerance down here where it's anti-inflammatory. These short chain fatty acids, this vitamin D, these are influencing these Treg cells that are causing tolerance. Whereas over here, where we get lower and lower and lower on vitamin D, then we start getting invasive pathogens. We start getting these immune cells that are reactive. We start getting this leaky gut where things are getting in. We start getting these overactive dendritic cells, and we start getting this tissue damaging inflammation the lower that your vitamin D is. So if there's one takeaway from this pretty complex picture here, the higher vitamin D is, the more anti-inflammatory it is. The lower vitamin D is, the more pro-inflammatory it is. This is coming from that picture, and this photo are coming from this paper in Frontiers in Immunology, published in January of 2020. So I don't know when you're watching this, but right now it's February of 2020. So this is brand spanking new. It's the relationship between vitamin D, the gut microbiome, and systemic autoimmunity. What this is showing is that you could have a genetic predisposition, you could have different SNPs in your vitamin D receptor genes, but when you have those things and you have different composition of your microbiome, you have increased gut permeability, and this can cause that, and that can cause this, and this can cause that, and you have increased immune activity and inflammation, aka loss of tolerance, and it leads to autoimmunity. And that's what the whole paper is basically echoing there. And then one last one. This is from the journal Cell Reports, and it says dietary fiber and bacterial short-chain fatty acids enhance oral tolerance and protect against food allergy through diverse cellular pathways. So these short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and acetate, they come in here along with vitamin A, and they promote these Tregs, and the Tregs promote tolerance. The regulatory T cells promote tolerance, versus if you don't get those, it's going to lead to this susceptibility to a food allergy or a food sensitivity. So the short chain fatty acids are really important there. Here's another just picture, a Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine, but the title says it all, vitamin A, the key to immune tolerance in the gut. So vitamin D, vitamin A, short-chain fatty acids, glutathione are the four big ones. Probiotics come next. Detox support also, leaky gut support. Some of those things can be necessary, but for tolerance, especially those big ones. So those are some of the supplements, some of the lifestyle steps that just help in general. Number one is avoiding food triggers, and that can be done through an elimination type diet, through an autoimmune paleo protocol, which eliminates all the most reactive foods: grains, dairy, corn, soy, egg, nuts, seeds, nightshades, lectins. It's really restrictive. There are other diets that are more like an elimination diet, more like a Whole30 diet, more like a paleo diet too, that are really, really great, but you eliminate some of the triggers, or you get a food sensitivity test. And we do a lot of food sensitivity testing, and we'll find that people have lost tolerance to things like broccoli and bell peppers and popcorn and honey and like avocados and oranges and healthy foods, but their bodies have lost tolerance. And so when they eat those foods, it's triggering an immune response that's triggering inflammation that leads downstream to symptoms. That's really important. Fasting is really can be really powerful for restoring tolerance. Fasting can reset the immune system. Very, very cool research coming out about fasting, and a lot of it's on autophagy, which is the body, auto meaning self, like autoimmune, and phagy meaning eat. So like Pac-Man, I mean, literally it looks like Pac-Man. The body will eat itself. It eats the bad cells, so it goes around and eats cells. It eats precancerous cells, it eats rogue immune cells, and it will restore tolerance and reset the immune system through various types of fasting. Fasting mimicking, daily intermittent fasting, extended fasting, all kinds of stuff with that. A diet variety is really important. Oftentimes the foods that you lose tolerance to are the ones that you eat every day. So you eat eggs every day for breakfast, you're probably going to develop a sensitivity to those eggs because your immune system sees them so often. You want a high variety. And the number one thing is a high variety of fibers. That's where these short chain fatty acids come from, is from a high variety of fibers. It's a fiber metabolite. So, and a high variety of proteins, high variety of fats. You just want a high variety, because if there's just a lot of players, a lot of, things that your immune system is exposed to, it gets a little bit better at differentiating good from bad, and it kind of, I don't want to say confuses it, but it kind of keeps it from recognizing like, oh, we've seen this guy before, we're going to attack him. So my mentor, Dr. Karazian, what he will do is have people do what's called a veggie mashup, and he'll say, go to the supermarket and go to the vegetable section and get all the veggies that you've never even had before. Parsnips and jicama and I don't even know what else, just the random ones, beets, radishes, different leafy greens. Just get all these different veggies, mash them up in a blender. Do not juice them, you want the fiber. Mash them up in a blender and drink that every day. And he tells people very frankly, he says, it's going to taste like crap, but drink it down. If you're motivated enough to restore tolerance, to reduce your autoimmune disease, drink it down. It's over in a minute and you're done with it. But you're getting that high diet variety is really, really important. Exercise can help tolerance. Stress management can help tolerance. These are more general, but they help everything. So exercise, stress management, the sauna and detoxing and rebounding. And the point here is that everything helps everything. When you're working on your body as a whole, when you exercise, you're not doing that for tolerance, but it kind of helps everything. When you're working on detox pathways and making sure your lymph is moving, make sure your sweat is moving, making sure your bowels are moving. When you're working on some of these things, everything helps everything. So in an indirect way, those will absolutely help tolerance. So this is a really, really important concept, this concept of tolerance, oral tolerance, chemical tolerance, and self-tolerance, because loss of self-tolerance is autoimmune disease. The immune system has begun to attack itself, or to attack your own body, I should say, attack self tissues. So understanding this concept of tolerance is crucial to getting your autoimmune disease under control.